Today is the 12th day of January 2015, and I'm very happy to have a dear friend with us, Mandakini.
I know.
Namaskar. We always begin by asking people how they first heard of Sri Aurobindo and Mother, when it was, where it was.
Okay, should I give background to that or
Certainly.
go directly?
No,
Okay.
as you feel.
Well, my first memory was at 4 years old, where I was walking down the street with my mother, and I was suddenly gripped by a place that had a circular hedge. And it struck me very deeply, and I wanted to stand there. What was it? What was it? And I was a little girl, so I was pulled forward. And then probably the next year, I had an understanding, looking down the street, that life was a miracle and that people lived it in a very small and petty way. To fast forward, I only found my way to the ashram when I was 33 years old.
But at 5 you had this realization.
It was very clear to me, and I remember the words, life is a miracle, and everybody lives it in such a small way. Then when I was 8, I prepared a kind of concoction for my dolls. I made them cupcakes just by mixing soap suds together. And the result was, strangely enough, a golden orange color that had a very specific perfume. And I couldn't get enough of the perfume. I kept on getting up all night to smell it. And I remember this color. So I was about 8, so that corresponds to early 1956. Over the years, when I caught that smell, it was very rare, I would follow the person, like in the New York City subway. What is it? What is it? I finally found the smell again in the ashram when I first came here in 1980, and it was the perfume of the flower the mother named the joy of integral faithfulness. Yeah. And that circular hedge that grabbed me when I saw it when I was 4 corresponded to how the ashram dining room was at that time when I arrived.
Mm-hmm.
But even more than that, later when they published that wonderful book of Mother's paintings, they showed a painting she had done of Timanlis's garden in Normandy, which also was like that. But I grew up in a family that was half atheistic and half Orthodox Jewish. But I mean, really, my mother's side, very Orthodox. My great-grandfather was a very respected Hasidic rabbi. And so my grandmother was the daughter of the rabbi. And she had a very, very rigid approach to obeying the laws, saying the prayers. And it just, I couldn't relate to it whatsoever. And I remember one time on Shabbat, she asked me to carry something because she couldn't as an adult. And so I carried it. I didn't mind carrying it, but there was something in me that refused the idea that if God wanted that she should obey and I shouldn't. So in any case, time went by, and I was a daughter of 1968 and understood from politics that politics was not the answer. The only way was to change ourselves. And so that led me to Woodstock. And after that, I was at Woodstock, which was...
Did you know Julian at that time?
No. We only found out this year that he also, and no. And so the main thing that started happening was that I went to Spain, and I was on a small island called Formentera, and following my generation's progress from politics to drugs to spirituality, I had my one and only psychedelic experience, which was very terrifying. But I understood several things from that. One, there was no place else. There was just this expansion of existence, no way out. And that I had previous lives because I saw some of them. But at the very end, when finally the experience was over, thank God, suddenly, and I was peaceful and calm and in control, suddenly my mind opened into a big space that was very, very, very pale blue. And I said to myself, I don't know what this is, but I want this. And you, who were so close to Tammy, if you remember the color of the cover of one of her books of poems, with the roses, 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 but on an extremely pale blue background, it was that pale blue which I later learned was Aurobindo color. And what you had described in your dictionary of an infinite mind, the lexicon of an infinite mind, was what they called azure, this extremely pale, pale blue. So that still didn't get me to the ashram, except that the very next day, the very next morning, I met some Americans in Spain on this little island who had just come back from the ashram.
Oh.
And that was
the first time you heard Sri Aurobindo's name?
exactly. I never knew anything about it before. And they told me the story that they had heard at the ashram of John Kelly, that American New York fireman who
Very
had,
close friend of mine.
really?
Oh, yes.
See, I never
In
knew.
fact, I recorded his whole history one
Oh,
time.
you did?
And it was lost.
Oh, no.
The big tape was lost.
Oh, my God.
But John was a wonderful friend. And close to Sam and Eric.
Oh, really?
Very close.
Well, his story really struck me, that he was continuously saved by this vision on the battlefield, and then he went back to New York City and went to this very famous bookstore and opened a book called The Life Divine. It was right after World War II, and
Yeah.
what does he see but the photograph of the last darshan, as you know very well, of Aurobindo, and that was the last vision he had had on the battlefield in World War II.
Great Sir
Great Sir, exactly.
and Heavenly Lady.
And Heavenly Lady. So I wanted to believe that, but I wasn't sure it was really true. It was a fantastic story, and when I finally got to the ashram, I was very happy to know that it was true, because that sort of sparked something in me, and I started going into a thing of following coincidence. And I had an experience with a Catholic saint, Saint Rita, where everything was very clear that I was being led. And finally I went back to the States. Then I went to Mexico, where I was doing a master's in Spanish and had this understanding that there was something that was not rational in the world. So the next year was, it was step by step. It was very progressive and slow.
Yes.
But it was because I was so skeptical. I didn't believe in God. I wanted to debunk everything. And I had a requirement, which was that I wouldn't be a dupe. I had to be proved. I was a very logical, intellectual person, and I had to have my proof. So step by step, things started to lead me that there was a guidance and intuition, but I wasn't going to be a dupe. So
Was this a backlash from the Orthodox Judaism?
maybe,
A reaction against it?
maybe, it could be.
Yeah.
Well, I have very wonderful memories of my grandfather, and particularly with my
A saintly man.
He was a very pious man. He
Pious
was
man.
the husband of my grandmother, who was the daughter of the rabbi. But I remember when my grandfather prayed, there was something extremely beautiful. And again, flashing forward, when I came to the ashram, within the first 2 months, I was sitting at the samadhi, and there was a man who came and did a full pranam at the samadhi, but without any ego. It was just such a beautiful gesture. And I felt something, and I said, but I know this atmosphere. I know this atmosphere. What is it? And then I remembered, that's how it felt when my grandfather prayed. And so, to me, the problem was solved, because it was the same thing. It wasn't just another version of another religion. It was all the same vibration of love. But to get back to how I actually came to the ashram, I was in Colorado the year after Mexico, and in a car with a girlfriend, and we were in the Rocky Mountains going through Aspen, and our car hit a patch of ice, and we started going towards the precipice. In the Rockies, they didn't have any guardrails.
Yeah, yeah.
And so somehow in me, I thought, well, it'll be very beautiful. It'll be a great experience. The car will turn over and over and over, and then we'll land very gently in the snow and very softly, and the snow will come up and down the windshield, and we'll look at each other and say, wow. And just when I had visualized this whole thing, the car stopped halfway over the precipice in the Rocky Mountains. And so myself, the great atheist, get out of the car, and I went down on my knees on that road, and I said, I don't know who or what, but thank you. And then we went back to my friend's house, and everybody was sort of acting as if I had been the source of something. And it was because that had come through me, and it was only later at Jyoti Priya's
what was that come through you? That experience, that the prayer, or?
Yeah, the belief that it was just going to be beautiful.
Oh, okay.
The absolute non-fear that, yes, it would just be beautiful. And I read later, when I got to Jyoti Priya, something Mother had said about an accident that had been avoided, where she said somebody had been conscious. And what did that mean? That the person had been in touch with his soul. And there was some story about a cart, very, very heavy cart, that was going to fall over on some ashramites, and then suddenly it just righted itself. And people said to the Mother, how did that happen? And she said somebody there was conscious. And so between 1972, when this happened with the car almost going over the precipice, and then 5 years later meeting Jyoti Priya in Los Angeles and reading this text by the Mother, between those years I'd always wondered, well, what happened? What happened? The car stopped. It had a great velocity. We're going over the edge. And it stopped. And so, a few weeks after that, I find a piece of paper on the ground in the university that said, Sri Udar Pinto, Sri Aurobindo Ashram, speaking here at the University of Colorado. And it was the year the Mother had sent Udar to America.
Yes.
And so I said, yeah, Sri Aurobindo Ashram, the story of the guy on the battlefield, oh yeah. So off I went, and I walked in. He was reciting the Hour of God, and he was so dignified, and I'd met so many fake gurus in America. Can you imagine?
Yes. And
there was Udar standing very nobly and reciting the Hour of God. Woe to the unready who has not kept the candle wick trimmed, right? So, but again, I still wasn't convinced.
Could we just go back a bit to your first meeting with Jyoti Priya?
Yeah, so that was the next year, and that was the final step, was that I had met somebody on the other side of the United States who said, you're in California, because I'd moved to California, you must meet Dr. Tyberg, you must meet Jyoti Priya. And I said in my heart, oh, I'm just going to be disappointed, so I'm not going to go. And so I didn't go. And the year after that, it was Sunday, August 15th, 1977. I didn't know what to do, and there was this guide, New Age events in Southern California. And there I see it. Sri Aurobindo birthday celebration, Dr. Judith Tyberg, East-West Cultural Center. And I had been trained at that point to follow the signs. So I said, okay, that's it. So I went. And you who knew her so well, you will remember how she was. I walked in and she was sitting on a chair in front of a large group, and she said, "Friends, we are at the dawn of a new age for humanity." And that was that.
That was it.
That was it. But I came there knowing absolutely nothing about anything, and I found everything very strange. And then Jyoti Priya would say things like, "Oh, that's what I love about the mother, she's so practical." And I said, "My God, I don't know what she's talking about. How can that be practical?" But little by little, and Jyoti, as you know, her school of devotion,
Yes.
she had activities for us, like doing Savitri, and I was Durga in the Four Mothers. And when you see the photo, I was Durga. And then she had an evening where she gave us all a prayer to read that corresponded, one of Mother's prayers that corresponded to each person very perfectly. And for me, the prayer was, "My aspiration to Thee, O Lord, has taken the form of a beautiful rose, harmonious, full in bloom, rich in fragrance." And then I lost my job, which was great. They closed the company, they sold it, and so suddenly I was free, and I was in India 2 weeks later. I arrived here on February 3rd, 1980.
Where did you stay?
In the beginning, I was a little bit here and there. I stayed next to Oscar. I met Norman Dowsett because of Meera Jyoti in Aurobindo, and so he took me under his wing for a while. And then Aurobindo Basu came back from Calcutta. He was there for darshan. And then he said, "Oh, stay here and work with me." I didn't stay with him, but work with me, so I stayed somewhere else. And then he introduced me to Mona very early on, and so I was in Golkund from after a few months. But you see, I didn't really like the ashram at first. I didn't know. But then when I had that experience of feeling that same vibration of love that I felt from my grandfather, then everything started from there. And I started working in the dining room and teaching in the school.
And you met Nalini and he gave you your name.
Yeah, it was my first year and my 33rd birthday, my first year in the ashram. And I went to ask him for a name, and he said, "We'll see." And then I heard that he wasn't going to give me a name, and I said, in the first act of true detachment, I said, "Well, okay." And then somebody said to me, "Oh, no, he's given you a name, you must go and see him, he's given you a beautiful name." And so there he was, he wrote, "Mandakini, a gentle flowing stream," which at the time he should have given me the name something like a series of explosions. It really was a long-term program to call me a gentle flowing stream, but there it was, Mandakini. And he explained to me, he said, "You see, the Mandakini, she's the one who comes out of Shiva's hair. And she's also a real river. And on the surface, she's going very slowly. That's the Manda part, the slow. Mandakini, she who is slow, gentle." He said, "But underneath, she moves very fast." And so I took that as something for me. Because you see, Narad, we both grew up in America. I had trouble seeing myself as anything other than a cute little girl from New York City. The idea of me having any type of spiritual anything was extremely remote. I was just a very rational, intellectual, ethical, nice girl from New York City. But then things started happening. For example, in my room in Golkund one night, there was a bowl of golden light that came rushing in like a comet through the shutters in Golkund, and it hit me in the chest. And then I just saw white lotuses. Or I had a very clear vision of the Dance of Shiva going on. And there was this dance that they were all doing as all the everybody was dancing around Shiva. It was the presence and the power, the presence and the power, the presence and the power. I had a dream of Abai Singh's room where I didn't know who he was or anything about it, but later, when I went up to his room with Dhanavanti, there was what I'd seen in my dream. It was like a gallery of evolution with lots of shells and archaeological prehistoric things. And then I had a dream of Mother's staircase, and that Mother's room, and I had not been there. Went up the staircase with great difficulty and went up to a first floor where she was sort of, her bed was there, but she wasn't there. That made her seem dead. And I kept on going up the staircase. And near the end, it was extremely hard. I really had to force myself to keep going, to not fall backwards. It was so hard. And then I got out on this terrace that was just filled with fantastic light. And so then when I finally did have the opportunity to go up her staircase and see how her rooms were organized, that last terrace up there, because I had never been there physically before. So little by little, I started saying something like, well, maybe me too. And I had lots of friends who had visions here. I didn't have visions, Aurobindo would appear to them. That wasn't me. But I had these things that happened. And let's see, what else? The experience of Shaktipat. There was, I became very good friends with Kailasbai, who was the school guardian, remember? And he had a friend named Maharaj, B.K.S. Patel, who was from Karnataka, and he would come to the ashram every now and then. And he and Kailasbai became my brothers. And on Rocky Day, I put the bracelet on them. Well, they put the bracelet on me.
Yes.
Yeah, they put the bracelet on me to protect me. And Maharaj, who was this very distinguished-looking guy with his hair in a top knot and a long beard, and he would always say to me when he saw me, "Sister," like this. And so he insisted on doing pranam to me, which I didn't want him to do pranam to me, but he took me as a representative of the Divine Mother, woman. And so he touched my feet, and I put my hand on his head, and whoosh, off away in some fabulous ecstasy that lasted for many hours. And then one time after that, I became close with Madhav Pandit and went to his satsangs. And one time I said to him, I was in a very high state of aspiration. I said to him, "Oh, your feet look just like the mother's feet." And so he gave me this funny little smile, and he touched my hand in a very specific way with his finger. It was like this. And he smiled and looked sideways. And whoosh, off I went again into... But I read later in the Kapali Shastri book, who had been his guru.
Flame of white light.
Flame of... there was something, I think something like 1,000
was
slokas to the
book.
Divine Mother.
Okay. Yeah.
And he talks about that gracious sideways glance of the guru. Now, Madhav was not my guru, but it was the sideways glance, very gracious. And Vasanti Rao was just telling me that was the initiation by looking sideways. The guru looked sideways because he wasn't personal. If he looked at you straight like this, it was like a personal, person-to-person thing. But the sideways thing, he depersonalized himself from the force that was going through him.
And touched only your finger with his
Only my
finger.
finger. And looked sideways and smiled. And then the last time was with Jumanbai, just before he passed. He was so sweet. He took me in his arms so many times. He died the next month. Took me in his arms so many times, and I went back to Golkon just floating up there in joy. So, me too. It wasn't exactly to be imagined, but me too.
So how long did you stay in the ashram?
I stayed in the ashram for almost 3 years. I washed dishes and dried dishes, which was the best job at that time. I taught in the school, which was a tremendous, tremendous privilege, especially in the flower room school. The children were just too much. I had a little painting class. And so first we'd start by meditating together. And sometimes I'd open my eyes after the children. They were all looking at me like they were the adults. And the children were wonderful. They would have conversations like, who do you think is more beautiful, douce mère or the most beautiful child in the world? Or they would, somebody one time made pink and painted a cross and said to the other, they were 5 years old, what do you think about Jesus? Really? And then I remember one time in a little school program, they played the Sunil's music with Aurobindo's mantra, Om Anandamayi. And the children started singing with all their hearts. There were about 40 children, all little.
This was here in Delafont?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And even the teachers who were present, like Anjana, and they had worked with the children for so many years, but even that, the way they started singing this. And then I worked with the older kids too, and that was a lot of fun. And that was a year when I started composing little spiritual songs. There was one very beautiful one that came, Let It Shine on Me, Your Golden Sunshine, Shine on Me, Divine Love. And the first...
You set it to music?
Yes. The first verse was, so many years I've wandered and waited. So many years I've wondered, unsated. Now that I know which way to go, from day to day I can just pray, let it shine on me, your golden sunshine. Yeah, that was beautiful. And then there was another one, when you give from the heart, do not end and always start. And then at the archives, I had the idea that the flower book, as it was organized at that time, was a little confusing because some of the flowers seemed to appear in several places. And I said, but I've seen that flower already. So I did a deeper search that some of the flowers had changes in botanic names. And so... Many, as you know, you're the expert. And so I reorganized it into 12 categories according to meanings, and Jantila was very pleased, and the whole archives team liked it a lot. But then I went back to the West, and Lilo was the courageous person who devoted 17 years of her life to finishing the book.
So where did you go?
I went back
and why?
to why. Oh, well, this is very personal, but here we go. Since this is a testimony, right? It's a testimony of the change.
But you say whatever you wish.
Yeah, I know. Well, like many American girls who you may know, I sort of started falling in love with an ashramite. And this is important to say only because I've noticed this phenomenon here and in other spiritual places, that you become so grateful to somebody who has shown you light, that the heart area opens, and then the gratitude widens, and it's sort of, since it's based in the heart area, it's easy to get a little confused about what you're really feeling. And I know of many girls who got very confused. But I didn't get confused, I recognized, and I said, well, that is not a good thing, as grateful as I am to this friend who helped me so much. And then my vitals started saying, oh, the rest of my life I had a permanent visa to stay here forever.
Oh.
I did. And on that story, if I can just tell a story for the record, at one point when I was trying to get my visa, Kameshwar Rao, do you remember him? He's an old ashramite who came in the 30s. And he was happy because he had done the Ganapati dance for the mother in the playground. Big belly Ganapati dance. And so when we went to the visa office together, he told me his story, which was that he had come to see Aurobindo, and he was a nationalist. And so he said, I am not going to bow down to a foreign lady. I will do my pranam to Aurobindo, but not to any foreign lady.
So we've heard this before.
Many times. And so he went for his darshan. He did his pranam to Aurobindo. And then he said, I looked into the mother's eyes. I said to myself, this is not an ordinary being. And he did his full pranam to her. Yeah. So,
but it was unusual at that time to have a visa, a long-term visa like that.
yeah, and not only that, before that, the more unusual thing was that I was able to stay 18 months on a 6-month visa. Everybody had to go after 6 months, and I finally, in the beginning, I wasn't so sure if I liked it here, but then after that, I couldn't leave. I could not leave. So I would go to the visa office every time my visa expired and say, I can't go. I have to be here. And they were so sweet, they would say, okay, Ma, come back at the end of the week, and they would extend my visa for a month, 2 months. This went on for a complete year. They had an ashram calendar hanging in the visa office at the time, the photo of the mother. And one time when they said to me, you've asked too many times, this is it, I just went over to the calendar and I stood like this in front. And so what did they say? They said, okay, come back in a few days. And they extended my visa. So all this went on until I heard that my mother was ill. And then I went back. But you see, so then when I went to the visa office the last time, and I'd had the help of Kameshwar, and even Kunuma, who was the head trustee at the time, had said a few words for me. So when I went for the visa, I had decided that I wanted to go back. And so when I went for my visa, they said no. And you see, it was entirely based on my aspiration. I was the person who had the reputation for staying the longest on a 6-month visa. And I told Patty and other people, if you can't go, they will not make you leave. And Patty, I don't know how many years she stayed here like that. So when I went to see Kunama, and he said, did you get your visa? I said, no. And
to leave?
To stay longer, but I had decided I wanted to leave to go back and help my mother.
Okay.
And so when I went to see Kunama to say in any case that they had refused to extend my visa this time, he said, he was generally very self-controlled, if you remember. He was a lawyer, and he suddenly said, I don't understand what happened. And I didn't have the heart to say to him, but I changed my mind. I do want to go back. And that was the key. So I went back, helped my mother, reconciled with my family who couldn't understand why I was here for so long, went to San Francisco and got a residence visa and came back to the ashram. And then, I don't know, I started feeling like I couldn't see myself here for the rest of my life, which I felt very guilty about. And then I understood that for me I had a challenge. If this was true, which took me a long time to accept that yes, this is true, if this were true, then I should be able to live it anywhere. And that became the challenge, to live it in the West. And so I went back to California. And a funny thing that I just remembered with Loretta the other day was the East-West Center. So I went back to Joji Priya Center, and the crowd was there, the same group. And we decided to bring Aurobindo's relics to California. And so we started talking about what to put the relics in. And somebody had made a replica of a kind of a mini samadhi for 4 people. 4 people could pray at the same time. And so we decided to try it. It was made out of cardboard. It was sort of like a lotus with 4 sides. So there was Loretta, there was Trudy, I think there was Suzanne Cosgrove, and there was me. And just to try it to see if we had elbow room, we put our hands down and our heads on it as if we were at the samadhi. And then none of us moved for the next 20 minutes. And then we all lifted our heads at the same time. And Loretta said in this kind of professorial tone, she said, "And this is what we call a descent." And that's what it was on this cardboard thing. They later did something very beautiful for the relics. And then after that, I came to France. And I've been in France for 30 years.
Well, let's take a break for a few moments and pick up with your going to France.
Ay, ay, ay.